Hey, great to have you here. So today we're going to talk about Dexter Original Sin, Episode 4, titled Fender Bender. Towards the end of the discussion, we're going to find out why it was called that for this specific episode. Did want to quickly call out too, I made a video separately on this, but we got news of a new Trinity spinoff prequel as well, so a lot of Dexter content to go around, seems like at this point, but focusing now on Episode 4. So Episode 4, as far as the kind of high-level concepts with this one, starting off with characters, I kind of feel like Deb has regressed a little bit, and this may just be my opinion, but it seemed like in the first episode we had a lot of the typical Deb behaviors, but not in an overly forward, aggressive way that feels a little bit too jarring. Seems like over the last few episodes, some of those behaviors have come off a little bit strong, and I get that's kind of Deb's personality, but it seems a little bit forced here at times, so not as big a fan of the performance there over the last couple episodes. Dexter with Patrick Gibson, I feel like has continued to be solid. He's really getting into that role and just filling out the shoes of how Dexter behaves and certain mannerisms that he does have. Harry, personally, feels like a little bit lost as a character, and maybe that's the point. He's kind of going through a hard time at this point, so that's potentially part of his character development, but it feels like Christian Slater taking on Harry's character isn't fully fleshed out at this point in time. Some of the other characters in the episode, like the Captain and Tanya, LaGuerta, Masuka, were barely in the episode, but they were fine when they showed up here and there. They had a new cop included in this episode named Clark. He was good overall, and Batista wasn't even in the entire episode, so no inclusion of him at all in this review. A little bit strange with having him not in the episode at all. As far as some of the plot points, I want to make sure I hit home. It doesn't feel like we've gotten much payoff with the kidnapper story yet. We got some more information with that, but it feels like that story is kind of happening behind the scenes and a little bit on pause, and we're diving into some of these other side plots at this point, so hoping we get more development with that over the coming episodes, but it seems like for the most part, that one is kind of stalled in some ways here. I'm holding out hope, though, that winds up being a strong plot by the end of the season. There's more drawn-out Harry and Laura Moser scenes in this episode. Some of them are a little bit more interesting than we've gotten in the last couple episodes, though, I will say. They involve more of Dexter and Brian, which really are the characters that we want to see them around Harry and see how he acts at a younger age and see why maybe Harry made certain decisions that he did wind up choosing. Then we have Deb, who's continuing to be in her rebellious phase. I didn't find this subplot overly interesting. Maybe something will happen with that later. Maybe like Dexter's going to save her at some point and it's going to have some ultimate payoff there. But it almost feels like Deb's side story at this point feels like the human plot in like a Godzilla movie where it's like, okay, we need you, I get, but you're not necessarily what I'm here to watch. You're not the point of the show ultimately. And at times it feels like it takes away screen time from the main plot of Dexter: Original Sin. For me, Dexter hunting this new killer named Mad Dog was the best part of the episode. It's really what we watched the original show for. Making another Saw analogy here, it's kind of like in Saw 10 when they finally brought back Tobin Bell. It's like, this is the point of watching this specific movie. We want to watch it for these plot points and these characters, and having Dexter hunting people down is the point of the show in the original show, and that's really kind of the bread and butter that they're used to, that they go back to quite a bit in this episode, so those points are pretty strong in this episode, I will say. Essentially having more serial killers in the serial killer show feels like more relevant and more what we're watching for and more the story that we're interested in. Some of the time period references, while cool in this episode, did feel a little bit forced. There's like a Blockbuster and a Sega reference, which, once again, were cool to see. It's like, oh yes, I remember the 90s, but in some ways it felt like it was kind of shoved down your throat and didn't feel as organic as far as being, oh yes, we just see that naturally. This is something from the 90s. Look at this, look at this. The music in this episode was solid overall. I feel like they had some really fun songs included here. Just overall, I felt like this episode probably had more highs and lows than any prior episodes. Obviously, I've given a lot of neutral ratings, but I think this episode specifically, more of it was like up here and then down here. It didn't spend a lot of time in the middle. It had those really strong outliers. It was like really strong here and really rough here. I've kind of mentioned this in the past. I feel like doing prequels in general are somewhat hard for me because they're trying to build suspense when we know where we wind up in the future. So having Dexter potentially got to get caught and things like that, it's hard to do because even if he gets caught in some small moment, it doesn't matter because there's an original show. So obviously it doesn't get that intense enough. So it's kind of an uphill battle for me dealing with prequels. So maybe my expectations are a little bit too high, but overall balancing out some of those extreme highs and extreme lows in this episode. Once again, I'm going to say this episode gets a neutral rating, so this has more variety as far as things I really liked, things I really disliked, compared to the prior ones, but that's out to being a neutral episode once again overall. So those are my thoughts as far as a high-level overview of the episode. So with that, we're now going to jump into the spoiler territory, walking through step-by-step what takes place in the episode. So the episode starts off more upbeat, where these two people are roller skating, and there's like music playing. Suddenly we have this drastic cut to seeing the kid who was kidnapped in the prior episodes is tied to this bridge, appearing to be dead there. Then we cut to the scene of Miami Metro showing up. Then you have Dexter think to himself, murdered children always get to me. So it really drives home the point that kids are a sensitive subject for Dexter. They're areas that he really has trouble digesting. And that's, as a viewer, good to see because he generally is trying to protect people. He's obviously taking really drastic measures that goes beyond what normal people wind up doing. But it's showing his softer side, saying, hey, these are kind of defenseless people, and I feel extra sympathy towards them. At the scene, we have the captain there, and he sends LaGuerta to a separate crime scene. He makes some point like, hey, no life matters more than the rest, right? Kind of jabbing at her a little bit, so sends her over to this other scene. And then Harry also sends Dexter there because he realizes Dexter's having a tough time coping with this. He sends him over, I think it's called Coconut Grove, where the other crime scene's at. Then we cut to Deb and her friend at home, and she sees a note from Harry saying, hey, Dad took the truck, and she needs to take the volleyball team to the beach with her car. So she's once again trying to remain popular and is super frustrated in this instance at Harry, building up that tension between them two. We then cut to the crime scene where Dexter's at, who was taken by this cop named Clark. This character gets a little bit more screen time here, one that we haven't been familiar with in the past. But he winds up talking to Dexter, and Dexter feels a little bit better after talking to him. I think the actor who played Clark did a great job for a somewhat smaller role in the show. We then have Dexter at the crime scene, and this is one point I forgot to mention in my main overview. There's a kind of weird transition here, and they do that quite a bit in this episode, where they have these transitions where they show something, and then they cut to something else. So a bit of a weird one here where Dexter is retelling the story, what happened at this crime scene, and we get kind of a flashback of it taking place. So Dexter's retelling it, and we're watching the retelling of it actually happening when it happened. LaGuerta's super frustrated with him. She's like, I'm not going off of hunches. You need to tell me exact facts what happened here. And then kind of a weird thing here. We have the Dexter narrator. So Dexter, presumably from New Blood, is then talking at this point and says, it takes a while for LaGuerta to appreciate my skills. I'm not really sure what the timeline as far as the narrator or perspective is supposed to be in the show, because there's times where we get Dexter and he's speaking as if he's in New Blood and he's talking about, oh, in the past, here's what took place. And then there's times where we have Deb and Harry off doing their own things, which obviously Dexter wouldn't have been there for. So it's hard for me to really understand, are we supposed to be living in the time frame of 91 with Original Sin and not taking into account future New Blood Dexter? Or is Dexter retelling the story? We're doing a little bit of both, and it makes it a little bit confusing from the viewer perspective as far as what are we supposed to be able to know from this point? Is future Dexter thinking things that current Dexter actually wasn't thinking? Just feels like a little bit jumbled as far as the expectations here. Let me know your guys' thoughts if you felt like that was a little bit odd too, or if you think, hey, it's clearly supposed to be New Blood in the past, or it's clearly just supposed to be from a Original Sin story perspective. Just doesn't seem consistent with picking and choosing when we decide, hey, this is Dexter talking in the past, and this is, just actually things happening. We then get a quick scene back with Deb at school, and this popular girl shows up, and she's in a brand new car, and she takes all of her friends to the beach and leaves Deb and her friend Sophia there. So just building up that storyline with Deb and her friends, which I'm not really sure if we're going to get much development with that beyond just having that be kind of a side plot. Back at Miami Metro, we also have Harry go to Camilla, so this is a scene between them two, and confirms that the shipping container information with Dexter is not in Laura Moser's file. So he wants to make sure with Dexter working there that there's no reference of that taking place, because he doesn't want Dexter snooping into that and getting that information ultimately brought back up, which we know what happens with that obviously in the future in the original series. But then we cut to a flashback with Harry, and we have his partner telling him, hey, don't forget that Laura's your informant, right? Like, you're not supposed to be developing a relationship with her beyond that. It's just your informant. So in that flashback, Laura's supposed to go to the shipment with Harry's partner to meet Estrada, which means Harry needs to watch Brian and Dexter. So we get some more time with them here, which is a cool inclusion here. Once again, it kind of feels like Dexter's character feels a little bit older than he should be. Super nitpicky, but when we have shipping container Dexter in the original series, he is younger than what we have here at this point in time, but that's just kind of a small nitpick. Then here's where we get our first pop culture reference. We have Deb going to this Blockbuster employee who's outside, and she's buying drugs from him. Shout out to Blockbuster, obviously. Great to have that back in the day, but long gone at this point. I kind of imagine they picked Blockbuster because it's a recognizable name, and they're kind of bashing it because the employee's dealing drugs, but it doesn't really exist as a company at this point in time. I think there's like one store maybe that's still open somewhere, but beyond that, it feels like they felt fine criticizing Blockbuster employees with this scene. We then have Dexter come home to Harry and tell Harry, hey, this kid killer deserves to die, and he's really on edge, and Harry's like, didn't you just kill somebody recently? He's like, yeah, but this really got me going. So He asks Dexter, hey, do you have somebody in mind? And then Dexter shows him this file for this guy named Mad Dog, and I recognize this actor, but apparently he has a body count as high as 200. He was a professional hitman with decades of experience, and Harry is super concerned about Dexter taking this guy on because he obviously has this experience as a hitman. He's got to be a tough person to take out, and Harry wants him to have proof once again, so we're going to have Dexter wind up trying to gather that evidence. And then Deb shows up and realizes she's left out of the conversation, probably for good reason, but she's very sassy about it. And here's a scene where it kind of feels like she's a little bit insufferable. Once again, I know that's the point of her character, but they hammer it a little bit too many times with having her mad that the relationship with Harry and Dexter is not including her, and it just doesn't make her a likable character, which is tough as far as trying to expand beyond just Dexter as the cast of characters that we enjoy being around. In this scene, we also have Harry realize that she's on drugs. He kind of just blows it off, though. We then cut to Dexter stalking and talking to Mad Dog, which, good instance of here, having the situation brought up, mentioning Mad Dog, and then cutting to it. It felt like this was an instance where we don't bounce between these other storylines where we get kind of lost in all this extra mess. Really just keeps us on track with the main story. And we have Dexter pretend to be a guy named Doug, and he's looking to charter a boat. And he gets the business card from the guy, which has the address, and therefore Dexter's now able to go and gather evidence. So Dexter goes to the house and gets some of the evidence. He definitely is a little bit sloppy still here. He's not wearing gloves, which we get in the future. And he's like touching all the stuff at the guy's house. He grabs like a back scratcher and starts using it on his shirt. I don't know if this is a stretch, but it seemed like somewhat of a metaphor with him scratching his itch to kill by being at this guy's house hunting him down. So that's kind of what I got from that. Going through his stuff, he winds up seeing a shredded photo is left there. Feels a little bit odd. I feel like if you're somebody who shreds stuff and is really concerned about leaving evidence, you fully shred something, but it's like in the top of the shredder where part of it's not shredded yet, and Dexter's able to just easily grab it out and just like kind of put it together and see it's the face of some guy. So a little bit odd that he would leave that in his shredder just that available. Then back at Miami Metro, we have a meeting with the team, and the captain's called by his ex-wife, it seems, to take care of his son. He goes into his office with her, and they kind of argue quite a bit. And it seems like we're setting up a trend of the police force prioritizing their work over their family life. We have some of that with Harry and Deb, and we have it once again here with the captain and his son. The son of the captain's out in the waiting area playing Sonic, and Dexter goes over to him. We see the kid playing this on his Sega Game Gear, which I was not overly familiar with this console, so cool to see that here, I guess, as a reference point, but once again, feels a little bit forced, including here. I know kids play games, so it's a little bit more natural than maybe the Blockbuster one was. Dexter offers the kid candy, and the kid goes, I'm not allowed to have candy, which feels a little bit odd. I feel like a kid's not going to say that. He's going to take the candy, but it seems like he's being obedient, and Dexter's like, I won't tell anybody, so he's breaking the rules a little bit with the kid there. We then cut to Dexter retelling a crime scene in the office. So he's done some of this in the original series where he's like bashing stuff to kind of demonstrate what took place in the original crime scene. It's a little bit shoddy here, though. He has melons that he's demonstrating this with, and he's like throwing them on the ground. I don't know if the show was trying to be funny with the demonstration. Didn't really land in that area, but pretty much the point is he's showing that the victim died prior to hitting the floor based off how the melons crack in different instances where they're thrown down. And this tells Dexter the kill was ultimately an intimate kill, which leads them to believe, hey, this guy was killed by his lover. Then we have a super awkward scene at the end where Tanya comes in and says, are those my cantaloupes? And we have Masuka say, hands off Tanya's melons, which it feels like kind of once again forced. I get that's kind of the characters that they're playing, but it seemed like a reason to include them in this episode specifically without having them necessarily part of the main story. So a little bit strange there. We have a random scene where Deb's at home with her friend Sophia and they're trying on dresses, and her friend's like, your dad's gonna hate it. So maybe that's just setting up the following scene with her. Dexter's digging through his computer and he looks at the photo that he got from the paper shredder and realizes this guy's named Reyes, and he's not dead yet at this point. He's actually set to appear in court, I think the following Tuesday or something like that, which tells Dexter he needs to stop this guy before he ultimately kills Reyes. Dexter winds up walking out and he runs into the cop Clark from earlier. He winds up talking to him for a little bit. He says, hey, I followed your advice, so I'm taking action, not letting my feelings bottle up. And we find out here, actually, Dexter is asking for advice of dealing with his angry sister, Deb. And Clark mentioned that his brother died. So Clark told a story earlier about how he saw somebody die at a young age, and we find out it's his brother. So sad story there, but we get some more development as far as Clark's character. Maybe he'll be included in more future episodes. Hope to see that with his character. We then cut back to Deb, who's sure enough at this club with her friend, and she goes over and grabs a bunch of alcohol from this one booth, and this older guy sits down, winds up flirting with her, and she's like, hey, I gotta stay with my friend, and he leaves his card with her, once again setting up the next scene that we wind up getting with Deb. Dexter then brings the evidence back to Harry, saying that, hey, Reyes is about to testify against the mob, and he's the next hit. Set it for Mad Dog. And he doesn't have a foolproof bit of evidence here, but feels confident enough. He says something like the simplest explanation is most often the right one. So from that, Harry once again mentions, hey, he's a professional hitman. You think you could beat Michael Jordan in one-on-one, trying to make a reference once again to the time period. And Dexter, not being familiar with sports, is like, who? Kind of funny scene there between the two of them. Obviously, Harry's a sports guy. Dexter's clearly not. Dexter then tries to guilt Harry a little bit further, saying, hey, Reyes is trying to do the right thing and testify. He has a family, and eventually gets Harry to reluctantly approve of the situation. That scene ends with Harry making a peanut butter sandwich, and once again, kind of a weird transition. We cut back to Harry watching Dexter and Brian making a peanut butter sandwich. He goes outside, and we see Brian there briefly. He's cutting off the tails of lizards and says that Dexter ran off. So definitely setting up the expectation as far as Harry's opinion of Dexter and Brian and which one is more salvageable as far as going forward after what winds up happening with Laura. But when Harry hears that Dexter ran off, he freaks out a little bit, realizes what happened with his son, and he panics and looks all over the place. We see Dexter outside trying to save the lizards whose tails that Brian cut off. They ultimately have a lizard burial, and you have Brian say something like, you really messed him up, Dex, and he's like smiling, very much trying to pitch Brian as this maniacal, just unsalvageable kid, and pitch Dexter as maybe more of the normal character at this point in time. We get another weird transition of current 1991 Dexter lifting his head back up again. So we jump back to present time, and Dexter's bummed to find out he's going to go on this boat with Mad Dog, and he realizes Mad Dog booked some other people to go on the boat with him. He also makes the point, hey, wish I could get a boat like this. So definitely setting up, foreshadowing the slice of life inclusion that Dexter winds up getting in his life. While on the boat, Dexter tries to talk to Mad Dog a little bit further. He talks about, hey, what kind of work you did? The guy mentions he was in foreclosures. Dexter tries to use like code words with him saying, hey, did you feel bad when you foreclosed people's homes? Using that essentially as a word replacement for killing people. And through that conversation, he realizes Mad Dog expresses no guilt whatsoever for all the things he's done. So definitely feels like he fits his code at this point in time. We then cut back to Deb, who's at home, and she calls Gio, the guy from the club. He comes to pick her up. He has like a car phone that she calls Harry from and leaves a message. Definitely once again dates the season as far as this took place in the 90s. And when she leaves her message, she mentions to her dad, hey, something about school. And then Gio realizes, hey, you're still in school. And she's like, is that going to be a problem? And he still doesn't seem to care. She then goes to his place. They're talking for quite a bit of time, and they wind up doing some kind of hooking up, it seems like. Harry eventually comes home, hears the voicemail from Deb. You hear Gio at like the end of it, which he makes the comment, not even a good lie, Deb. Harry's sitting there, he looks down at his watch, and once again, we get a weird transition to this clock from back in the day when he was with Laura Moser. Super cheesy transition with that one. And Harry's putting Dexter to sleep. Dexter's like sleeping with him there. Laura comes home and says, hey, the plan went super well. She asks Harry to stay for a drink. Originally, he resists. He's like, I need to go. But then they wind up hooking up as well. So a lot of that taking place in this episode. Maybe you're relating the two situations, Harry and Laura and Deb and Gio, as far as relationships that shouldn't be happening but happen to be happening. We have a super weird song transition here where there's a song playing in Harry's flashback. Then we cut to present time where the song's actually playing live on this record player inside of Mad Dog's house. He goes up to the record player. Obviously, Dexter put this on, and he smashes Mad Dog in the back of the head with a guitar. We have kind of a weird scene here. I don't know if Dexter didn't properly tie him up or what happened, but Dexter has him on the table. He's like pulling his pants down, which I guess I get eventually he winds up being naked, but we've never actually seen the scene of Dexter taking their clothes off, so trying to show us a little bit of that here. And Mad Dog gets up and starts attacking Dexter. They're fighting for a little bit of time, and I don't know if this is supposed to be a funny scene, but Dexter grabs an electric guitar off the wall and he's going to swing at Mad Dog with it. And Mad Dog's like, no, not the Clapton, trying to protect the guitar. And Dexter's just like, okay, and he smashes it on the ground anyway, so I don't know what the point of that scene was. Mad Dog winds up running outside, and he's just running down the middle of the street, and Dexter's chasing after him. And the episode pretty much ends with a scene of Mad Dog getting hit by some oncoming traffic from a car. So we're not positive, did Mad Dog die from that? Is he just injured? What's going to happen with that? So I think they did a good job as far as building suspense at the end of this episode. Once again, though, we know Dexter's not getting caught, so I don't know how much suspense you can build with that. But I will say this was the best episode finish as far as wanting me to immediately watch another episode, because they got to end you off with a cliffhanger. So you see him get hit and it just cuts to black. So we want to know what happens with the culmination of that scene. One point I wanted to call out was the court case with the criminal from the first episode. That wasn't even brought up in this episode at all. Are we bouncing around between too many criminals a little bit too much? I realize the legal system takes time, which is maybe the point of Dexter, maybe the point of the rationale here, but there's just no reference to that guy in his court proceedings at this point, so we're bouncing to other stories while that's kind of on hold. Similar to the kidnap killer, I realize we got the intro with the kid being seen, but after that, it's not really brought up again, and I'm not really positive what was the point of having the kid get kidnapped, losing the finger, all that stuff, just for him to be dead at the beginning of this episode. I'm really hoping we get payoff with that plot, because it felt like there was a lot of development with the kid, and then the kid's just dead, so not much took place there, and I'm curious to see where we go with it eventually, so hopefully there's a big payoff with that one. What were your guys' thoughts on the episode? As I mentioned at the beginning, it felt like we had some really good highs, but some really low lows as well, and that nets us around the middle area. Just seems like I'm enjoying the stuff where Dexter's hunting down these killers more than some of the other stuff with Deb and her side plots, and Harry with the backstory with Laura Moser. Some of that we just still already know, and I get they're giving more explanation and more exposition as far as why Harry did what he did, as far as taking Dexter instead of Brian, but I don't know. Feels like we're kind of padding it out still at this point in time. And halfway through the season at this point, seems like we should have more flushed out, especially because I mentioned in some of my wish lists that I wanted a big bad to be presented early on in the season. We haven't even confirmed who a big bad could be in this season, so I'm not sure we'll be getting one. Maybe it's the guy who kidnapped the kid. Maybe it's the guy who got arrested in the first episode. It just seems like there's not much interesting stuff going on with some of these criminals and the development there. It just kind of seems like a slow progression with us taking these pivots to these other stories like Deb stuff and things like that that aren't overly as interesting to me personally. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Did you like the Deb stuff? Are you really enjoying that? Maybe I'm just an outlier thinking they're wasting some time on some of that stuff. Are you enjoying the Harry flashbacks? Some of them are worthwhile, like as I mentioned, the one with Brian and Dexter and him like cutting off the lizard tails. Feels like that told us some stuff that, while we knew it, it definitely helped provide some light as far as Harry's choices that he winds up making. Feels like they're dragging out that romance between the two of them for so long, and I'm not sure if we're going to get to an end point of that, or we're going to have flashbacks in all episodes of the entire season. Not really sure with that one. So, as mentioned, let me know your guys' thoughts as far as what stuff you are enjoying, what stuff you're not enjoying as much. Maybe your thoughts as far as this episode and how it compares to some of the ones we've gotten thus far, and your hopes for what we get in the future. So, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.